The cold expanse of space burned red with fire and destruction. Explosions flared like dying stars as the Nixari assault ships descended on the human colony of Ilaris Prime. The ground below was scorched and trembling. Its cities shattered under relentless bombardment. Orbiting above, the Aurora's flame weaved desperately through the chaos, its weapon arrays firing at full capacity. "Shields at 22%, Captain." Lieutenant Kara Voss shouted over the din of alarms. Her fingers danced over the console, trying to reroute power to the failing systems. Captain Evelyn Drax stood firm at the bridge's command console, her piercing gaze fixed on the tactical display. The enemy ships moved with calculated malice, cutting off every escape route. The Nixari, insectoid creatures with crystalline exoskeletons, operated with a cold, machine-like efficiency that only deepened humanity's terror. "Focus all firepower on their forward formation," Drax barked. "If we can punch a hole, we can extract the evac shuttles." The crew obeyed with grim determination. The ship's heavy plasma cannons roared to life, tearing through the void to strike a Nixari cruiser. It shattered into fragments, but the enemy adjusted almost instantly, closing the gap with 2 more vessels. "Captain, incoming fighters on our 6, shouted Ensign Rake, his voice tinged with panic. Drax's jaw tightened. "Deploy countermeasures and keep us moving." "Lieutenant Voss, where are those evac signals?" "Shuttle Beta has cleared the atmosphere," Voss replied, her voice strained. "But Shuttle Alpha?" A sudden explosion rocked the ship, nearly throwing the crew from their seats. The main display showed Shuttle Alpha disintegrating in a blaze of fire. The bridge fell silent for a moment, the loss sinking in. Drax slammed her fist on the console. Damn it. Her anger was quickly replaced by resolve. "We can't save them all, but we'll save who we can. Helm, prepare for a full burn to the outer orbit. We'll draw their fire and give the other shuttles a fighting chance." The Aurora's flame surged forward, leaving streaks of fire as it accelerated through the Nix-Ari blockade. Enemy fighters swarmed like locusts, peppering the ship with laser fire. One by one, defensive turrets were silenced, and hull breaches were reported across the lower decks. "Captain, we're losing structural integrity," Voss warned. Drax ignored the warnings. "Hold together, old girl," she muttered under her breath. As the ship broke free of the main engagement, the tactical display showed the surviving shuttles jumping into warp. A flicker of relief crossed Drax's face, but before she could order the retreat, a faint signal caught her attention. "Captain," Rake said, frowning at his console, "I'm picking up a strange energy signature from the colony ruins. It doesn't match any Nix-Ari tech." Drax's eyes narrowed. "Is it human?" Rake hesitated. "No, ma'am. It's something else." For a brief moment, the captain considered ignoring it. But deep down, she felt a pull, an instinct honed from years of battle. "Helm, adjust course," Drax ordered. "We're investigating that signal." "Captain, with all due respect, we're barely holding together," Voss protested. "I know, but if that signal is what I think it is, it could change everything." Reluctantly, the crew complied. The Aurora's flame descended into the debris-filled atmosphere of Ilaris Prime. What they found in the ashes would set them on a path that would either save humanity or doom it forever. As the ship touched down, the artifact awaited, pulsing faintly with an eerie blue light. The Aurora's flame broke free from the scorched surface of the Ilaris Prime, carrying with it the enigmatic artifact. It sat in the middle of the science lab, suspended in an anti-gravity field, pulsating faintly with an eerie blue glow. Despite its unassuming size, barely larger than a human skull, the artifact radiated an otherworldly presence that made the air in the lab feel heavier. Captain Evelyn Drax stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face a mask of tension. Across the room, Chief Science Officer Malik Soren meticulously adjusted scanners, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you make of it?" Drax asked. Soren exhaled, glancing up from his equipment. "It's not Nixari. That much I'm certain of. The energy it's emitting is older. Precursor tech, maybe. But there's something else. Something alive in it." "Alive?" Drax's voice was sharp, her unease deepening. Soren nodded grimly. "I don't mean sentient, necessarily. More like reactive. It's interfacing with our systems in ways I can't explain. It's almost like it's learning." Before Drax could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing her against the bulkhead. "Bridge to Captain." Lieutenant Voss's voice crackled through the comm. "Nixari ships have found us. 3 cruisers and a fighter wing closing fast." Drax pushed herself upright and bolted for the bridge, shouting over her shoulder, "Seal the lab. I want constant monitoring on that thing." By the time she reached the bridge, the situation was deteriorating. The tactical display showed the Nixari vessels in pursuit, moving with alarming speed. They must have traced the artifact's energy signature, Voss said as Drax took her seat. "They're not letting up this time." "Options?" Drax demanded. "Not many," Ensign Rake replied, his voice tense. "The nebula drift field is nearby. We could lose them in the interference, but it's risky. Too many gravitational anomalies, and navigation would be a nightmare." "Do it," Drax ordered without hesitation. "Better the nebula than certain death." Helm, set course. The Aurora's flame veered hard to port, engines flaring as it raced toward the drift field. Behind them, the Nixari ships fired relentlessly, their plasma bolts streaking through the void. The nebula loomed ahead, a swirling mass of cosmic dust and shimmering gas clouds. The ship plunged into its depths, and immediately the sensors flickered and alarms blared. The gravitic disturbances tugged at the hull, causing violent tremors. "They're still following us," Voss shouted. Drax's mind raced. "Deploy decoys and scatter the debris field. If they want us, they'll have to work for it." As the crew executed her orders, the artifact in the sealed lab began to glow brighter. Its pulses synchronized with the ship's systems, and a strange hum filled the corridors. Drax glanced at the tactical display and noticed something odd. The artifact's energy was creating interference, masking their exact position. "What the hell?" Voss muttered, staring at the readings. Drax leaned forward. "Whatever it's doing, it's buying us time. Let's not waste it." The Nixari cruisers struggled to maintain their pursuit as the Aurora's flame darted through the nebula, using the chaotic environment to its advantage. One by one, the enemy ships began to falter, unable to track the elusive human vessel. Finally, after what felt like hours, the last of the Nixari ships fell behind. The bridge erupted into relieved cheers, but Drax's expression remained grim. "Don't celebrate just yet," she said. "This wasn't luck. That artifact helped us. The question is, why?" As the Aurora's flame emerged from the nebula into the safety of open space, Drax couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact was far more dangerous, and far more important than they realized. "Set a course for the nearest safe zone," she ordered, "and double the guards on the lab. Whatever this thing is, we're not the only ones who want it." Unknown to the crew, deep within the Nixari fleet, a shadowy figure studied the faint signal left behind by the artifact. Its crystalline form shimmered ominously as it whispered in a guttural tone. "They have the key." The Aurora's flame glided into the dark expanse of uncharted space, its hull still scorched from the recent pursuit. For now, they had evaded the Nixari, but Captain Drax knew the reprieve was temporary. In the war room, a gathering of the ship's senior officers turned into a heated debate, voices overlapping in frustration. "We're risking everything for a glowing rock." Lieutenant Voss snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "We've lost too many good people already. How can we justify this?" "It's not just a rock," Chief Science Officer Malik Sorum countered, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "This artifact is emitting energy patterns, unlike anything we've ever encountered. If we unlock its secrets, we might stand a chance against the Nixari. Without it, we're just delaying the inevitable." "And what if it's a trap?" Ensign Rake interjected, his face pale. "What if they planted it, knowing we'd take the bait?" Captain Evelyn Drax had heard enough. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the commotion like steel. "This isn't a democracy. That artifact is the best lead we've had since this war started. We're keeping it, and we're going to find out what it can do." She paused, her sharp gaze scanning the room. "If anyone doubts that decision, you know where the escape pods are." The room fell silent. No one moved. "Good," Drax said, leaning back. "Now let's talk about how to stay alive long enough to make this matter." In the corridors of the ship, tensions continued to simmer. Whispers of dissent spread among the crew. The losses on Elaris Prime and the narrow escape through the nebula had taken their toll, and the artifact had become a symbol of both hope and division. Meanwhile, in the lab, Sorum's analysis of the artifact deepened. Its glowing pulses had grown more rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. As he worked, the lab doors hissed open, and Velthor entered, a tall, lithe alien with translucent skin and piercing silver eyes. Velthor had joined the crew weeks earlier, claiming to be a defector from a race once enslaved by the Nixari. Though many distrusted them, Drax believed they held vital knowledge. "You've been staring at that thing for hours," human Velthor said, their voice a melodic blend of curiosity and disdain. "Have you learned anything meaningful?" Soren sighed, rubbing his temples. "Meaningful? That depends. It's doing something. Interfacing with our systems, integrating itself into our ship. But I don't know why." Valthor's gaze lingered on the artifact, their expression unreadable. "It is older than you realize, older than the Nixari. It is a piece of a greater whole." Soren froze. "How do you know that?" Velthor turned, their silver eyes glinting. "Because my people once revered such relics, and we were punished for it." Before Soren could press further, the ship's alarms blared. On the bridge, Drax barked orders as the tactical display lit up. A cluster of Nixari fighters had dropped out of warp and was closing fast. "How did they find us so quickly?" Voss shouted. "They're tracking the artifact," Drax said grimly. "We need to move. Helm, set a course for the nearest Dilibris field. Let's lose them in the scrap." As the Aurora's flame veered into evasive maneuvers, the artifact in the lab began to pulse erratically. The lights on the ship flickered, and strange symbols scrolled across the displays. "What the hell is going on?" Rake asked, panic rising in his voice. Soren's voice came over the comm. "Captain, the artifact is reacting to the Nixari presence. It's coming to them." Drax clenched her fists. "Soren, shut it down. Now." "I've been trying," he shouted back. "But it's overriding our systems." The ship jolted as enemy fire clipped the rear thrusters. Sparks flew across the bridge, and the tactical display went dark. "Velthor," Drax growled, turning to the alien standing silently behind her. "You said your people knew these relics. How do we stop it?" Velthor tilted their head, unfazed by the chaos. "You cannot stop what it has already begun. You can only choose whether to survive its awakening." Drax's blood ran cold, but there was no time for hesitation. "Voss, prepare for a counterattack. Rake, get our weapons back online. And someone tell Soren to find a way to contain that damn thing before it gets us all killed." As the ship dove into the debris field, surrounded by fire and chaos, the crew of the Aurora's Flame faced the terrifying realization. The artifact wasn't just a key to humanity's salvation. It might also be their undoing. The Aurora's Flame drifted into the remnants of a long-dead planet, its debris field the only sign of a civilization that had once stood there. The scanners were nearly useless in the dense cloud of asteroids and shattered rock, but Captain Drax had no other choice. The Nixari fleet was still hot on their heels, and their only hope lay within the ruins. "Captain, we've arrived," Lieutenant Voss reported, her voice tinged with a mix of relief and anxiety. "We've located a potential site deep inside a crater." "Good. Take us in," Drax commanded. She glanced at the artifact, now secured in a reinforced containment chamber. Despite their best efforts, it had only grown more erratic, pulsing stronger every time the Nixari came closer. Soren had been working tirelessly to isolate its signals, but the truth was, they were running out of time. As the ship descended through the asteroid field, the crew could feel the vibrations of the dying planet beneath them. Massive chunks of rock drifted in every direction, remnants of the planet's destruction from an ancient war long forgotten. The scanners finally cleared up as they neared the target, revealing an enormous structure hidden within the crater, a relic from a time long past, half buried under layers of debris. "We've got something big down there, Captain," Rake said, his eyes scanning the data. "It's not a natural formation. This could be an old weapons facility." "That's our target," Drax confirmed, her voice unwavering. "Prepare landing party. Soren, you're with me. Voss, keep the ship in the air. We might need a quick escape." The landing party descended in a shuttle, landing outside the ruins. The towering structure loomed ahead, its spires jagged and broken, but still defiant against the passing of time. They made their way inside, stepping into a cavernous hall, its walls adorned with unfamiliar symbols. Despite the silence of the place, Drax couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "What is this place?" Soren muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. "This doesn't match anything we've encountered before." Drax scanned the room with narrowed eyes. There was an ominous stillness here, a sense that the place had been abandoned for centuries, yet it felt alive. "Just stay focused," Drax said, leading the group deeper into the structure. "We're looking for a weapon, something to give us an edge against the Nixari." The deeper they ventured, the more alien the architecture became, twisting, organic-like patterns that seemed to grow from the walls themselves. Eventually, they reached a large chamber, its floor cracked and scorched, the remnants of some long-forgotten battle. At the center stood a pedestal, and atop it, a massive cylindrical object covered in strange runes. "That's it," Soren said breathlessly. "That's the core, the weapon's power source." As Drax moved closer, a soft hum filled the air, and the artifact in her pocket began to pulse more rapidly, almost as if it were reacting to the presence of the weapon. Our hand instinctively reached for it. "Soren, what is this thing?" Soren stepped forward, cautiously studying the object. "It's not just a weapon. It's a key. This core activates something much larger. A network. It could amplify the artifact's power, or control it entirely. Then we're taking it," Drax decided. "We need to complete this weapon if we're going to have any hope of surviving the war." Just as she reached for the core, a loud crash echoed from above. The sound of pounding footsteps echoed through the hall, growing louder. "They've found us," Voss's voice crackled over the comm. "Nexari soldiers are en route. We've got about 5 minutes before they're on top of you." "5 minutes it is," Drax said, glancing at the pedestal. Her fingers brushed against the core, and as she did, the entire room shook violently. A blinding light erupted from the weapon, sending Drax and the crew stumbling back. "Captain," Soren shouted, his voice filled with shock. "It's activated. This thing, it's not a weapon anymore. It's a network. It's broadcasting a signal." The artifact in Drax's pocket flared in response, its pulse now synchronized with the ancient weapon. The walls of the chamber began to hum with energy, and the ship's sensors outside began to glitch and flicker. Something was waking up. "We need to leave now," Drax barked. As the ground trembled beneath them, the crew rushed to the exit. But before they could make it back to the shuttle, the ceiling cracked open, and dozens of Nexari soldiers stormed into the chamber, their weapons raised. Drax drew her blaster, her heart pounding. There's no turning back now. The war was about to change, and they had just lit the fuse. The Aurora's flame trembled as the crew rushed to the shuttle, the Nexari soldiers bearing down on them with relentless speed. Captain Drax's pulse quickened as the chamber around them came alive with blinding energy. The artifact in her pocket formed in sync with the mysterious weapon, its power amplifying by the second. "We're not getting out of here without a fight." Voss's voice crackled through the comms, sounding more urgent than ever. Drax gritted her teeth. "We don't have time to fight them all. Get the shuttle ready for takeoff. We'll hold them off for as long as we can." "Understood," Voss replied. Soren, panting and wide-eyed, pressed a hand against the pedestal, trying to make sense of the rapidly escalating situation. The weapon. He turned to Drax, his face a mask of desperation. "The network. It's sending out a signal to something enormous. I think the Nexari knew about this. They were trying to stop us from activating it." Before Drax could respond, a violent rumble shook the chamber. The walls began to crack as if the entire structure was coming apart. The Nexari soldiers had arrived, and they wasted no time in unleashing a hail of plasma fire. "Get behind cover," Drax shouted. She dove for a shattered pillar, pulling Soren with her as the crew scattered. The blast echoed through the cavernous chamber, followed by the hiss of the soldiers advancing, their mandibles clacking in rhythmic coordination. The team returned fire, each shot landing with deadly accuracy. But the Nexari numbers were overwhelming. Drax's blaster overheated in her hand, and she cursed as she discarded it. The sound of heavy boots echoed closer, and she knew they were outgunned. 5 more seconds. Voss shouted over the comms. "I can't hold the shuttle for much longer." Soren's voice was frantic. "The weapon, it's activating something in the atmosphere. It's amplifying a signal that's spreading throughout the galaxy. We're not the only ones who can hear it." Drax felt the hairs on her neck stand up. The artifact was no longer just a weapon. It was a beacon, broadcasting its signal to an unknown force. "We don't have 5 seconds," Drax said through gritted teeth. "We need to take control of that weapon now." She turned to Soren, her mind racing. "Can you override it?" Soren hesitated, looking at the pedestal, the swirling energy it emitted. "If I can access the central node, I can." A deafening explosion shook the chamber, knocking Drax off her feet. She scrambled back to her feet, heart pounding, as she saw the Nixari soldier standing directly above Soren, their weapon raised. Before the soldier could strike, a strange, sharp whistle cut through the air. The soldier crumpled to the ground, and a wave of electric energy shot across the chamber, frying Nixari equipment and incapacitating several others. The remaining soldiers froze, looking up in terror. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in silver armor that shimmered with an iridescent glow. The figure's face was obscured by a smooth helmet, but their presence exuded power. Who are you?" Drax demanded, raising her weapon, but the figure raised a hand in a peaceful gesture. "I am not your enemy," the figure's voice rang out, deep and resonant, though the tone seemed foreign. "You activated something that should never have been awakened." Drax narrowed her eyes. "You're one of them, aren't you? Nixari sympathizer." The figure chuckled, a sound that seemed almost pitying. "I am no sympathizer of the Nixari. I am one of those who created the weapon you now wield, one of the architects. And you, Captain Drax, are the key to its full power." Soren's eyes widened in disbelief. "Architects? But how could you? Why would you?" "I did not intend for you to find it," the figure interrupted, stepping closer. "But now that you have, there is no turning back. The signal you have broadcasted is already being received, and the forces it calls will soon arrive. You may have a chance to survive if you can understand what you hold in your hands." Drax's grip tightened on her weapon. "Survive what? What are you talking about?" "The Nixari are merely a distraction," the architect said. "The true war has just begun, and your victory, Captain Drax, lies not in your weapons or in your battle tactics. It lies in your willingness to listen, to the signal that is now in the air, to the ancient ones who will come." Drax's mind raced as the realization sank in. The artifact had not just been calling to the Nixari. It had been calling to something much older, much more powerful. Something that could either save humanity or doom them all. "Then tell me," Drax said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them, "how do we stop it?" The architect's voice was solemn as they spoke. "You don't, but perhaps you might learn how to control it before it controls you." The figure in silver armor, the architect, stood like an immovable sentinel, its words lingering in the air like a weight Drax couldn't shake off. Her mind was racing. Control the weapon, control the fate of humanity. But what did it mean to control something so ancient, so vast? She couldn't afford to hesitate. "We've activated something bigger than ourselves, haven't we?" Drax asked, her voice cold with realization. The architect nodded solemnly, the light in its helmet dimming slightly. "Indeed, the network you've awakened is more than a weapon. It is a tool of both creation and destruction, a remnant of a long-forgotten war. The Nixari are not your true enemy. They are merely pawns in a game you cannot yet comprehend." Drax's hand tightened around her blaster. "Then tell me, if you're not here to help the Nixari, what's your agenda?" The architect's voice was tinged with regret. "My people once ruled over countless systems, but we were not content. We sought to expand our knowledge, to reach beyond the stars. Our ambition led to our downfall. The war we waged against the Nixari, it destroyed us. We scattered, and our creations, like the weapon you've activated, were left to their own devices, abandoned. So why now? Drax demanded. Why show up now, when we've already set the events in motion? The architect's head tilted slightly. Because the time is now ripe. Your species, the humans, have the potential to alter the course of this war. You are different from all those who came before. You adapt. You grow. And you? It paused, as though choosing its words carefully. You are capable of surviving what no one else could. Drax felt a cold note form in her stomach. What are you saying? The architect stepped closer, its voice becoming more urgent. The forces you have unwittingly invited will soon descend upon this system. They are the true architects of the universe, the ones who created all you know. But they are not benevolent creators. They have watched the chaos unfold, waiting for a time when a species like yours might rise to challenge them. And if we fail? Drax asked. Then the war will end, but not in victory. It will end in your extinction, the architect said bluntly. Soren, still dazed from the chaos, finally found his voice. And what do you want from us? Why show up now if you weren't planning to help us? The architect's helmet glinted in the dim light of the chamber. I am not here to offer help. I am here to give you a choice. You may wield the power of the weapon and attempt to fight what is coming, or you may choose to let it consume you. But know this, your survival depends on understanding what you hold. It is not enough to control the weapon. You must understand its purpose, its true nature. Only then will you have a chance to survive the storm. Drax clenched her fists, looking at Soren. His expression mirrored her own, the dawning realization that their actions had brought something to life they were ill prepared for. The Nixari were the least of their concerns now. What happens if we fail to control it? Drax asked, her voice low. The architect's voice was quiet but resolute. Then you will become another casualty in the War of the Architects, a forgotten footnote in the history of the universe. Drax swallowed hard. And if we succeed? The architect's eyes narrowed. Then you will become the new architects of your destiny. Soren moved closer, his face pale but determined. We don't have the luxury of choice. We have to try. Drax nodded. Then we'll figure out how to use this weapon to stop them. The architect remained silent for a moment, almost as though considering their decision. Be warned, Captain. There is more to this weapon than you realize. The power it commands will not yield easily. It will test you, challenge you. And in the end, it may cost more than you are willing to pay. We're used to paying the price, Drax replied, her gaze unwavering. We've already lost too much to stop now. With a final look of solemn acknowledgement, the architect stepped back, fading into the shadows. Drax turned to her crew. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to take control of this galaxy. But even as the words left her lips, a growing sense of dread gnawed at her. They had no idea what lay ahead, what the weapon truly was. All they knew was that the storm was coming, and they were now caught at its center. Outside the ruined facility, the stars were beginning to shift. Something was coming, and the crew of the Aurora's Flame had no choice but to face it head-on. The shuttle raced back toward the Aurora's Flame, the crew on edge as they neared the ship. Drax's mind was spinning. The architect's words echoed in her thoughts, a grim reminder that their path was fraught with peril. They weren't just facing the Nixari anymore. They were up against something far older, far more dangerous. Captain, we've got multiple ships on the scanner. Voss's voice broke through her thoughts. It's not the Nixari. These ships, they're different. They're massive, and they're closing in fast. Drax's eyes hardened. Can we get a closer look at their signatures? Not much to go on, Rake replied. They're emitting a strange energy field, like nothing we've seen. But there's definitely a huge fleet gathering, and they're all heading toward this system. Drax turned to Soren. What the hell is going on? Soren looked pale, his hands trembling as he typed furiously on the console. This is bad, Captain. The weapon we activated. It's broadcasting a signal that's being received across multiple star systems. It's calling the architects. Drax's gut twisted at the word. The architects. The ones who created all of this. Not just created it, Soren muttered, eyes wide. They were the architects of the entire universe. They shaped reality itself, designed civilizations, and manipulated the very fabric of space and time. What we've done is reawaken the progenitors of everything that has ever existed in this galaxy. Voss's voice cut in again. We don't have time for a history lesson. Those ships are here, and they mean business. We need a plan. Drax stood motionless for a moment, processing everything she had learned, everything they had discovered in the past few hours. The Nexari, once the focus of humanity's war, were now a secondary threat. The true enemy was something far older, more powerful, and far less forgiving. The architects were here, and they weren't coming to negotiate. We don't have the luxury of planning for survival anymore, Drax muttered, more to herself than to the crew. She turned back to the command station. Voss, get us to maximum speed. Soren, find out what those ships are doing. I want to know their intentions before they land on our doorstep. Soren's fingers flew over the console, the screens flickering with static. They're positioning themselves around the system, Captain. It's like they're forming a perimeter. They're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Drax asked. Soren glanced at her, the fear in his eyes palpable. They're waiting for the weapon to activate completely. They're waiting for you to unlock its true potential. Drax felt a chill run down her spine. And if we don't unlock it? Then they will, Soren said, his voice hollow. And when they do, they will take control of everything. Your species, the Nexari, every race in this galaxy will fall under their dominion. You'll be nothing more than ants in their eyes. The gravity of the situation settled over them all like a dark cloud. Drax could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She had no illusions anymore. The choice wasn't about victory. It was about survival. We need to fight, Drax finally said, her voice resolute. We need to hold them off long enough to figure out how to use the weapon against them. Captain, Rake said, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. What if we don't have to fight them? What if the weapon can be used to negotiate? Drax turned sharply toward him, her brow furrowed. Negotiate with them. Are you out of your mind? Rake swallowed nervously. What if the architects don't want to destroy us? What if they're just here to see who can unlock the weapon's potential? If we prove ourselves worthy, they might join us instead of annihilating us. Drax stared at him for a long moment. The idea was ludicrous, but for a fleeting second, she wondered if there was any truth to it. The architects were creators. They had shaped civilizations. But had they ever intended to destroy the species they crafted? Or had their motives been misunderstood? No, she said firmly. We're not taking that risk. We fight, and we fight until we can figure out how to control this weapon. We've already put everything on the line. Now we make sure humanity survives. The crew, though clearly conflicted, nodded in agreement. The Aurora's flame raced forward, the approaching fleet looming on their screens like a storm cloud ready to break. In the distance, the massive ships began to converge, a tide of ancient power ready to overwhelm them. Drax could feel the weight of history bearing down on them. This was no longer just about a fight for survival. It was about taking control of the galaxy itself. And in the heart of it all stood the Aurora's flame, humanity's last desperate stand. The stars blurred as the Aurora's flame pushed its engines to their limit, hurtling through the void toward the gathering fleet of the architects. Drax stood at the helm, her hands gripping the console as the ship's systems screamed in protest from the strain. They had one chance to survive, and they had to make it count. Approaching perimeter, Captain, Voss called from the communications station, her voice tight with tension. The architect's fleet is closing in. We won't be able to outrun them. Drax's eyes flicked to the readout. The massive ships, cloaked in an otherworldly energy field, formed a perfect circle around the system. It was clear now that they weren't just waiting for the weapon to activate. They were setting up a blockade, preparing to control everything. Soren's voice came through the comms, strained but resolute. Captain, the weapon is amplifying. It's connected to the fleet in some way. If we try to fire on them or break through, it might trigger something catastrophic. I'm not here to break through, Soren, Drax replied, her voice low and steady. We're going to make them listen. The thought of confronting the architects, of risking everything on the chance that they might be willing to negotiate, churned Drax's stomach. But she had no other option. They were cornered, and if humanity's survival depended on unlocking the weapon's full potential, then they would have to take the gamble. Voss, get us into position. We're going to need every second we can get to figure this out. Drax turned to Soren. Can you access the weapon from here? Override whatever's controlling it. Soren hesitated, his eyes flicking to the artifact, which pulsed ominously in the containment chamber. I think so, but it's not just a matter of overriding it. The weapon isn't a simple machine. It's a living network. If I tamper with it incorrectly, we could lose everything. It might spiral out of control. We don't have the luxury of caution anymore, Drax said, her voice hardening. Do what you can. Soren nodded grimly, typing rapidly into his console. The ship's interior hummed with energy as the weapon's signal began to flare more intensely. Drax could feel it, an almost tangible force growing stronger by the second. The architects were listening. They were watching. Captain, Voss called out, her voice sharp with alarm. The architects' ships are locking onto us. They've raised shields, and we're being targeted. We're moments away from being obliterated. Drax didn't flinch. Hold steady. Soren, can you force a channel open to them? Soren's fingers flew across the console. I'm trying, but this is unlike anything I've ever seen. They've encrypted everything. It's almost like they don't want to communicate unless we prove ourselves worthy. Drax's eyes narrowed. The architects were the creators of everything, yet they refused to acknowledge humanity. The only way through was to prove their strength, their worth to these ancient beings. It was a gamble, but it was the only one they had left. Soren, initiate the signal from the weapon, Drax ordered. Let them see that we have control. Let them know we're not just ants to be crushed. Soren hesitated, looking at Drax with uncertainty. Are you sure? Once I send the signal, there's no taking it back. Drax met his gaze with unwavering resolve. Send it. Now. The ship's systems pulsed with energy, and the artifact's frequency shot out into the vast expanse, a beacon that echoed across the galaxy. For a moment, everything was still. The crew held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. But then the impossible happened. The architect's ships stopped advancing. The energy fields around them flickered, then stabilized. The enormous ships hovered, their immense power seemingly held in check. For a brief instant, it was as if time itself had paused. "Channel open," Soren said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think they're listening." A low hum vibrated through the ship's hull as an ancient voice, deep and resonant, filtered through the comms. "Humanity, you have awakened the power that has lain dormant for millennia. You are the first to challenge us, but you are not the first to fail." Drax stepped forward, her voice steady despite the terror rising within her. "We are not here to fail. We are here to prove that we are worthy of our place in this galaxy. The weapon you created has been activated, but it is ours now. We will wield it, and we will fight to survive." The voice fell silent for a long, agonizing moment. Drax's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Would they be crushed under the weight of ancient powers? Or would they rise to become something more than the architects ever intended? Then the voice spoke again, but this time there was a change, an almost imperceptible shift. "Prove it, Captain Drax. Show us that you are worthy. The galaxy watches, and your survival is now in your hands." The comms went silent. The architect's fleet did not move, but Drax knew the challenge had been set. Their survival depended on one thing: proving humanity's worth. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about seizing control of their own destiny. And as the Aurora's flame drifted into the unknown, humanity's future lay on the edge of a knife, with everything to gain and everything to lose.